the overall plan, which aimed to lower the cost of insurance and prescription drugs. But phases 2 and 3 haven't been crafted yet.
How were they supposed to take into account something that doesn't yet exist?
Well, I think that's a question for the House to offer. There are constraints that are put on the CBO in terms of what they can consider. But I think that the point that we want to make is that, and it came up yesterday at the briefing, if members are going to base their vote off a score, they need to understand the totality.
The wreck. And we all knew that before the Congressional Budget Office released its surprisingly scathing score last night.
Democrats are having a field day with the CBO report, tweaking the president for putting his name on everything from hotels to water bottles, but not this.
No one wants to claim this bill. If it's so good, why aren't they rushing to have their names on it? Trump wants to call it Ryan Care. Ryan wants to call it Trump Care. It's classic Abbott and Costello.
Republican Freedom Caucus co-founder Jim Jordan says there's a reason every major conservative organization, conservative healthcare expert, 5 conservative senators, and a bunch of House conservatives don't like the bill.
I mean, we didn't tell the voters we were going to repeal Obamacare, but keep a bunch of the taxes for an extra year and bring back the Cadillac tax. We didn't tell them we were going to repeal Obamacare, but take expansion and extend it for several years. And we didn't tell them we were going to provide these in the bill and have a 30% penalty, even though the mandate's gone.
The president passed on the opportunity for any public comment today, even though he opened to cameras his office meeting and lunch with Saudi Arabia's defense minister, Mohammed bin Salman. On the agenda for that meeting, economic reforms in Saudi Arabia and the partial public sale of the kingdom's national oil company. And the White House today added another small piece to the puzzle on the president's claim to have been, quote, wiretapped. The press secretary today saying he expects the Justice Department will provide evidence to Congress to back up the president's tweets.
As I've commented in the past, I think there's significant reporting about surveillance techniques that have existed throughout the 2016 election. I'll leave it to them to issue their report, but I think he feels very confident that what will ultimately come of this will vindicate him.
The president also worked the phones on health care today, talking with the CEO of Anthem Insurance and talking with the Republican leadership in the House, Paul Ryan and Kevin McCarthy, about how to whip this bill into a form that can pass the House in its first time around being voted on. And tomorrow, BRET, the president, travels to Detroit, where he's looking at making some significant changes in Obama-era rules on fuel efficiency and auto emissions. So we'll be watching for that. Some big news tomorrow. Brett?
Much more on all this with the panel. John Roberts live on the North Lawn. John, thank you. A school complex in Syria bombed by Syrian government forces back in October was deliberate. That's just one of the atrocities a United Nations investigative commission cites in a new report looking at crimes committed over the last 7 months of the Syrian war. The report stated that government forces and their allies have shown a complete disregard for life and international law in the conflict. Iraqi forces are making big gains in the fight against ISIS as commanders announce troops have taken nearly 3/4 of West Mosul from the terror group. The U.S. envoy to counter ISIS says that any fighters left inside the city will die there. Brett McGurk making those comments as the coalition announced the group was now completely surrounded. President Trump, as you heard in John's piece, hosted a meeting with one of our strongest allies in the Middle East today. The president met with Saudi Arabia's Deputy Crown Prince at the White House. Joining me now to talk about today's meeting is Prince Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud, an advisor to the Deputy Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia and a member of the royal family. Your Highness, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Brett, for having me.
I know you weren't in the meeting today, but you've talked about it and heard about it. What can you tell us about the meeting between the Deputy Crown Prince and the President?
Well, Brett, as I understand, it went very well. I think they got along very well personally on a personal level and discussed many important issues, and I think they found agreement on most of those. Prince Mohammed was very keen to come meet President Trump as early as possible to re-emphasize the importance of the relationship between the two countries and to reinvigorate the strategic long-standing partnership that we've had. We've been partners and allies for 50 years. We've worked very well together. Saudi Arabia has been a stable and reliable partner for the United States for that time. And I think Prince Mohammed was keen to make sure that we can move into the 21st century together in a very positive and mutually beneficial way.
As you know, candidate Trump did not shy away from saying what had to be done with Gulf states, especially paying their fair share for protection or going after ISIS, something he reiterated after getting elected. Here he was in December talking about it.
When I look at what's going on in Syria, it's so sad. It's so sad. And we've got to help people. And we have the Gulf states. They have nothing but money. We don't have money. We owe $20 trillion. I will get the Gulf states to give us lots of money, and we'll build and help build safe areas so people can have a chance.
So what about that? Safe zones in Syria and you all helping to pay the bill?
Yeah, well, Saudi Arabia has always been keen to play its role in the region and in partnership with the US, so I think we are more than ready to cooperate with the United States on countering ISIS in Syria, in Iraq, across the region, not just financially, but the Saudi government offered in the Obama administration's time to send its troops into Syria to fight ISIS. That was not met with enthusiasm by the Obama administration. I think that offer remains on the table, and I'm sure we're more than, the Saudi government is more than to support the US in eradicating ISIS. But as I said, not just financially, but actually with its own troops and with its own people.
Interesting. So do you think that that plan is getting to fruition, that the Secretary of Defense has kind of worked on, the President talking about it, and is safe zones inside?
Zones specifically were discussed today, but I know that Saudi Arabia is very keen that the fight against ISIS doesn't just involve eradicating it today, but making the ground that helps it come to fruition in Syria and in Iraq doesn't exist in the future. So we have to make sure that the people in Syria and the people in Iraq that are liberated from ISIS can live peacefully, can in harmony, and that I think involves in Syria specifically protecting them from the Syrian regime and from its Iranian allies.
I know Saudi Arabia is in the middle of instituting some reforms, many reforms actually. While that's happening, the U.S. is considering what's going to happen. Secretary of State Tillerson wrote a letter this is from Foreign Policy. Tillerson, in this letter to the UN, advocates and human rights groups said that while the United States continues to evaluate the effectiveness of the Council, it remains skeptical about the virtues of membership in a human rights organization that includes states with troubled human rights records. And he mentions China, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I think we've always had an open dialogue with the United States about the issue of human rights. I think we've always acknowledged that, at least to Western eyes, there are some deficiencies in the Saudi system. We disagree on some of the assessments that the U.S. has on that, but I think we will continue to have that dialogue openly and frankly and work together to make sure that human rights universally, globally, are respected.
What does the reform mean for people inside Saudi Arabia if it goes as you expect? And what does it mean for countries, if that happens, around the region, Muslim communities and other countries in the Gulf states?
I think, the government in Saudi Arabia is very focused on empowering its people to be successful, to be able to have a good life, a good lifestyle. And I think as long as, we have a, improvement in the level of education, opportunities for the young folks, of course for women as well, and all that, I think that'll really marginalize the voices of extremism. And I think if we can set a very good role model for the region, hopefully others in the region can follow us.
There are some economic magazines who talk about Saudi Arabia and deflation, and that's serious concerns about your economy. Is the economy stable?
I think the economy is very stable. Deflation is less of an issue because of how it's structured. We have had the oil price has gone down, and we are reliant very much on the oil price, and that's one of the things we're focused on. Prince Mohammed, the Deputy Crown Prince, of course, his main issue is the 2030 program, which is focused on moving us away from a dependence on oil, on a much more dynamic economy, much more based on information technology, on skills that allows us to really go into the 21st century without this reliance on the oil price, which will allow our economy to weather in the future all of these challenges very well. And I think we have a very strong economic base, so I'm not worried about the economy.
As the U.S. deals with what the president calls extreme vetting and institutes this travel ban of 6 nations, primarily Muslim nations, that they've said, the administration says, has trouble with their visas over there coming here and is dangerous. You're not on that list, but your thoughts about this and what it means for the U.S.
Well, the Trump administration has described it as a ban not directed against Muslims. I think the Saudi government takes them at their word. I think my understanding is Prince Mohammed did discuss the matter with the president today, and President Trump re-emphasized the fact that it was not directed at Muslims as a religion, but at countries in which the vetting procedure is just not there to allow for safely understanding who is coming to the U.S. and things like that. And look, Saudi Arabia has very stringent standards to who it allows into its country. So I think we understand completely where the president is coming from in that regard. And as long as he assures us and assures the world that it's not something directed at any one religion, I think it's fair enough for the U.S. to make sure that its security is protected.
Your Highness, we appreciate your time today.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me.
Back here in the U.S., lawmakers already wrestling with this health care bill will need to refocus their attention on the debt ceiling, as the deadline to deal with it is tomorrow. And Wall Street will be watching. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel reports tonight on the next battle brewing on Capitol Hill.
The United States is due to hit the debt ceiling, the government's ability to borrow money, tomorrow night. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin addressed the issue during his confirmation hearing.
The president has made it perfectly clear, and I think it's perfectly clear, that honoring the U.S. debt is the most important thing.
Mnuchin sent a letter last week to House Speaker Paul Ryan noting the deadline is approaching, writing, quote, Treasury anticipates that it will need to start taking certain extraordinary measures in order to temporarily prevent the United States from defaulting on its obligations. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell tried to keep the markets calm when asked about it today.
We'll be talking to the Secretary of the Treasury about timing, but obviously we will raise the debt ceiling.
House Democratic Leader Nancy Pelosi has called for a clean debt ceiling increase, meaning without conditions. Today, Senate Democratic Leader Chuck Schumer challenged the GOP to step up on this issue.
First, let's see if there are enough Republicans who will vote to raise the debt ceiling now that they're in charge. We Democrats have never used it as a weapon.
The top House Democrats on the Budget Committee, John Yarmouth, and Ways and Means, Richard Neal, sent a letter to President Trump just yesterday writing, quote, you have promised the American people that you will not support Republican proposals to cut Social Security and Medicare. We would remind you that a failure to raise the debt limit would also prevent us from honoring those promises to seniors. In October 2015, Congress passed a budget agreement to allow the Treasury to issue new debt as needed through March 15th. The debt has grown since then from $18.1 trillion to $19.9 trillion. Press Secretary Sean Spicer notes the White House is releasing its budget this week, calling it part and parcel of an approach to fiscal responsibility.
How we address our budget deficits, our debt, and our spending going forward is something that is a holistic conversation that the Secretary and Dr. Mulvaney and others, and the President and Vice President, are engaging with Congress on.
The Trump administration intends to show a commitment to trim the budget and then will ultimately ask lawmakers to extend the borrowing authority. But nothing happens around here until it's deadline time. Brett?
Live on the Hill. Mike, thank you. The former Obama administration is setting records when it comes to a lack of transparency. The Associated Press reports the administration spent a record $36.2 million on legal costs last year, defending its refusal to turn over federal records under the Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA. The Obama administration also set records for times it told journalists and others it didn't have files that were requested or outright denied them access. The battles on Capitol Hill over health care and the debt ceiling, the president's allegation that he was wiretapped, and the existence of so-called deep state. All of this and more arose when our chief Washington correspondent, James Rosen, sat down with Vice President Pence, the first in his House office at the Capitol.
Alert and genial, the vice president had just finished meeting with Republican lawmakers on the effort to repeal and replace Obamacare. I asked him about the White House's criticism of the Congressional Budget Office projection that the GOP legislation as crafted would leave 52 million Americans uninsured by 2026.
If that's not correct, what is the correct number?
I think first we want to thank the CBO for their work.
And what the Congressional Budget Office is good at is estimating income and expenses in various federal programs. What I think they're less effective at is really evaluating what happens in the marketplace. Now, under the Obamacare mandate, they projected that there would be another 8 million people in the health care plan today than there really are. And so their estimates have been off in the past. We think they're off this time around,
and so
too.
What's your estimate?
I think it's very difficult for us to estimate how many Americans will make the individual choice to purchase health insurance, but we believe it's considerably higher than any estimate that we've seen in the public to date.
With lawmakers bracing for possibly the biggest battle yet over the debt ceiling, I asked about urging Congress to raise it once again. Where are you going to find your offsets?
We're very confident that when that vote comes up this summer, that we're going to be in a very different environment. The president's submitting his budget on Capitol Hill this week, and as the economy expands, we believe we're going to be able to meet the obligations of the federal government and deal with the issue of the debt ceiling in a fiscally responsible way.
Every week seems to bring new published reports about the FBI investigating members of the Trump campaign and/or the Trump transition for alleged contacts with high-ranking Russian officials last year. It seemed only fitting to raise the matter with the man who shared the campaign ticket and headed the transition. Have you been contacted by the FBI?
I have not.
The former director of national intelligence, General James Clapper, has said he saw no evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians. But Clapper also said he was unaware of any basis for President Trump's startling claim earlier this month that he was wiretapped last year by President Obama. When making such an incendiary claim, shouldn't the President of the United States be basing it on something more than something that comes out of the mouth of Mark Levin?
Well, there was a number of accounts alleging activity in the days that the president was referring to, and reports of potential broader surveillance. And look,
President of the United States, when he's making a claim like that, have something firmer than that?
I think the American people have a right to know what was going on.
Many supporters of President Trump claim that faceless career bureaucrats inside the executive branch opposed to the president are working behind the scenes to sabotage his agenda. The name given to this alleged conspiracy, the